As you guys can tell, we really set ourselves a nearly impossible task. Um, we set out to make something inherently hard. Integration, automation, whatever you choose to call it, anything that deals with APIs, deals with state, deals with data, it is a hard problem. So we set out to make it simpler, and at the same time, as you guys saw in what Vijay talked about earlier, the set of use cases have continued to expand. So make it simpler, at the same time, really do more. Um, so I think you heard Vijay talk about recipes a few times. Um, we set out to really rethink the problem. Actually, most of us come from having done integration enterprise software. So we have actually learned a lot of things, but many of them today are things that you don't want to do. Really, there's a lot of unlearning involved when we set out to do Workato. So what we wanted was a really deceptively simple interface, something that was easy to understand. So if you look at it, it reads like English. It literally does what you see. So something deceptively simple, but at the same time, very expressive, very powerful. So what happens behind the scenes is essentially, what you see here is sort of a very simplified view, and in the back, it is actually a domain-specific language that essentially runs at language speed and gives you all the expressiveness that actually a language has. So I think many of you, and including us, we're sort of used to this Visio-style workflow, but excuse me. One of the things that in Visio, those type of workflows is that you really, when you look at it, you don't get a sense of what is really going on. You see boxes, sticks, and so on, but with our recipes, you can actually tell, the logic that's actually being described. So in the Valley, we work with a lot of product companies. So actually, I think before I go in, the way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually talk about a set of use cases, and as part of the use cases, bring about what are the capabilities that are new, that are underlying, that make it possible. So it's a lot more easier to experience this than for me to talk about it. So definitely, when you have some time, sign up, play with it, and let us know what you think. So in Silicon Valley, we have so many product companies where we collect an incredible amount of product exhaust, essentially user activity in our products that we want to basically use to drive better targeted marketing and sales campaigns. So it involves taking this data and putting it into your marketing system, and oftentimes it can be incredible amounts of data. So we do that. We have several of our customers do that. So if you look at this recipe, it's just about 4 steps. And in these 4 steps, you can actually move, the same recipe works for 1,000 rows, and the same recipe works for 100 million rows. So in terms of what the end user does, this is what they do. The platform under the covers, we deal with the complexity. So for example, in this case, when you're dealing with incredibly large files, we do the streaming under the covers. We actually do the chunking, the fragmentation, and reassembly. So anyone that knows Salesforce, you know that they actually can process things more than 100 MB. So if you send it a 5 gig file, we deal with the complexities of breaking that into pieces, reassembling it, and making sure that they have all been successfully processed by Salesforce. So again, another example of sort of the recipe absorbing, abstracting complexity. So in this case, this is a lot of the recipes here are for illustration. They're sort of very simplified use cases, but here it's a simple recipe that creates orders in SAP. And anyone that knows SAP knows simple SAP can't really use it in the same sentence. Here, this SAP instance is actually running on-prem in the customer's network, and when you look at the recipe, you really don't actually see any of that. It's because we abstract away the complexity in terms of how we work with SAP, whether it be on the cloud or on the ground. So this is another example, again, just to feature the diversity of what you can do with recipes. Really, the recipe concept, as I said, is backed by a DSL, which means that you can literally really do anything you want. It's really what sort of over time we choose to expose via the DSL. So this is an example of a Slack bot, a bot in Slack that creates an incident or updates an incident in ServiceNow. Of course, this app could be working, this particular bot in the back could work with any number of applications because the recipe really doesn't really sort of put any restriction. And let's look at what it takes to build such a thing. So just in these few steps, you're able to create a bot that runs inside Slack and then sort of surfaces up a UI. That dialog is actually rendered by this recipe, and then it takes sort of the user input and creates the corresponding incident or updates it in ServiceNow. It's a really scary-looking picture, but when you sort of think about automating a manual workflow, it's really the perfect time to think about how to make it better, how to make it faster, or how to make it smarter. And especially today with advances in AI, especially around AutoML, where you can really throw a bunch of set of labeled data, and then out comes a reasonable model. Not great, but definitely so much better, and you can do all of that without actually having a data scientist. So one of the, so we are now seeing a lot of AI being applied to customers' use cases. So this is a very common example that we see where you have customer support function where they get a lot of emails, essentially unstructured emails coming in, and then people have to look at these emails and then create the right ticket, basically figuring out what the intent is. And what we've been working with several customers on is using a Keras on top of TensorFlow to look at these emails and then figure out what the intent is and allow the customer to actually have their own custom model. So essentially, you're not using some generic AI API that doesn't understand your data set. You can do things that are very specific to your data set and without having to really have a PhD in data science working for you. This is the recipe that goes with it. So far, I mainly focused my discussion around the process of building. We didn't talk a lot about sharing, but as the recipes are also inherently shareable. In fact, we have a community of over 250,000, probably more now, but recipes that the Workato user base has created and shared. What that means for you is if you come in and you're looking for a problem to solve, you can find a recipe, copy it, and start using it. So coming back to OpsIQ, so anyone, again, that's done integration or automations understands that you spend a small part of your time building it. Again, small is relative. You said you spend some time building it, and then much of your time and cost is in how you manage it. You're thinking about what do I do when my traffic volume goes up? Do I have to buy more? Do I have to get more compute? You worry about what happens when there are data errors. How do you handle that? So that's again one of the really sort of, by taking this approach of a recipe backed by a DSL, we are able to do more. First, with the architecture that we have, when a user clicks on start, we take care of everything under the covers. There's really nothing to deploy. There's nothing to optimize. The platform takes care of that. So, for example, if your traffic volume goes up, we automatically provision more compute. Traffic volume goes down, we take compute away. So all the typical DevOps complexity that you have to deal with is completely abstracted away. And dashboards, I think everybody has a dashboard. Our focus for the dashboard is really around the business process itself, the business process that you're automating, and focusing on exactly where the issues are, so that when you come in, instead of having to sift through a lot of graphs and charts and so on, we surface up the areas of issues. And again, dashboards, they're great. People want to use them. They like to use them. But really, what people really want is the ability to sort of automate the issue. Sort of when you have an issue, how do you actually automate the processing of it, the triage of it, and so on? So we have this capability that we call as autonomous recipes, and what it does is you can actually build a recipe that manages other recipes. You can actually watch a particular recipe to see if there was an error, and if there was an error, you could rerun it. If it is of a certain type of error, you can rerun it. If a certain type of error that is not recurable, you can actually create a ticket in GitHub and notify people using PagerDuty. So this is sort of one of the most popular feature set in our platform that people use, because operations is where you spend most of your time, and this helps you automate those operations so that you further are focusing only on things that cannot be automated.